The pen and ink caricatures of artist David Levine have appeared in the pages of Time, Newsweek, Esquire, Playboy, The New Yorker, The Nation, and for over 40 years, the New York Review of Books. 5 decades of Mr. Levine's presidential caricatures are featured in his new book, American Presidents. To learn more about his work, Book TV visited Brooklyn, New York, where the artist was born in 1926 and has lived the majority of his life.
For many years, you drew many thousands of drawings for the New York Review of Books. How did that start?
Somebody walked into my studio and said that they were hoping to see somebody whose work resembled Sendak. And I didn't understand that at first, but I began very quickly to understand that they were just talking about somebody who worked with a pen and ink in a small dimension. And so I said I would be interested in trying. They were interested in trying in this new publication. It was about 2.5 to 3 weeks old at that point. And I did a drawing, a fairly large drawing. At that point, there was no art director to say what the scale of drawing should be. And that art director never showed up for years and years and years.
Let me ask you about some of the drawings in the book. You have a new book called American Presidents, and on the cover is Lyndon Johnson showing a scar. Could you tell us about that drawing?
Well, I was very moved and very upset by, as were the editors of the New York Review of Books, who they asked to write books, who they may have appointed articles, reviewing books and so on with the same point of view as mine, which was very much thinking that the war in Vietnam was a dirty war, and that our identification with it was just full of lies and full of terrible things. To read the numbers of American kids that were lost in that. The number, we'll never know the degree of talent that went down in that war. And that, with that kind of loading in the pistol, I would, be able to come through and express a certain point of view. And as I said, the editors shared that. The editors themselves were very political, and in an anti-communist organization, I think it was called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And then they discovered somehow that that was funded by the CIA, which threw them for a while, that is, through the editors. But because they were dealing with the truth and with very able people who could express themselves about that, I think a very unique thing came through.
Do you remember how you got the idea with the scar shaped like Vietnam?
It wasn't the first time I had used that kind of illusion.
You did a lot of drawings of Nixon, and there's some of them in the book. What can I ask you? I'll ask you about a few of these presidents. Just your opinions. What you think of them? Nixon.
What do I think of him? I think he was a thief. I think he was a man who used facts for only one purpose, and that was to maintain power in his hands, and with a cabinet that was the beginning of the end of a certain kind of democracy.
There's a picture called The Kennedy Legacy, and it's John F. Kennedy's hair on a balloon.
Well, at that point, there were things that I didn't think. Kennedy's passed in and out of good deeds, good statements, intentions. They're certainly an attractive group. And I say group because it was more than just one Kennedy. There was a kind of look how one, I think, wonderfully Ted Kennedy turned out to be. I would have, in my heavy loaded bias days, I would have just, written him off and said fascist or some stupid thing like that.
There are several drawings of Henry Kissinger. I understand one of them was rejected by a publication?
No, by all other than one publication. That is, The Nation. In fact, The Nation was known as among cartoonists that, if you really had to try something or you wanted something that would be loaded in political terms, this was the place to go. And so I went there, and sure enough, they printed Kissinger having sex with the globe being the head of a woman. And I got a call from the editor saying, "Dave, I think you ought to come down. There's a group of young interns that want to say some things, that question some things you did in that drawing," which they did. They questioned my intentions. Was the hand clutching part of the bed a show of passion, or was it fear, or was it anger? Why was he on top of this woman? Why was the woman instead of a hairy man? They use the term hairy. And so on. And I said, in reference to the idea of sex taking place in a certain position, I said that I thought that 99% of the people in the world had sex in that way. And it was to suggest that sexually this guy he's screwing the world.
David Levine's paintings and drawings are part of permanent collections at the Metropolitan Museum, New York, the Library of Congress, the Cleveland Museum, the National Portrait Collection, England's National Portrait Gallery, and the Pierpont Morgan Library, New York. To learn more about David Levine, visit his website, davidlevineart.com.